Aloha everyone, it is Ajanette and I am here to go over your Chapter 7 lecture, which is addressing our emerging early adulthood, so from about 18 to your mid-30s, and it's kind of broken into two different areas and periods now, with that first chunk being assigned to emerging adulthood, and we'll talk about the characteristics of that time period in life. And then moving into that early part of your 30s being associated with early adulthood. So let's dive in. We're going to first address physical development and some of the patterns that emerge and impact us physically, our strength and capacity, and then we'll dive into cognitive and social and emotional development. Let's first talk a little bit about what emerging adulthood is. For some of you, that might be a brand new term. It's actually coined by Jeffrey Arnett. He is an anthropologist, and he really does talk about how emerging adulthood is very much a privileged time period that is afforded and observed in some cultures, but not others. So we do need to be mindful of that. And it's from 18 into the mid-20s or so, but it's a time where you're still kind of maintaining some of the characteristics of childhood and maybe dependency on parents. But then you also have one foot into adulthood and maybe some degree of independence. And you're emerging as an adult, right? Where you might be taking on some responsibilities. Some of you might be living at home, still very much have the parents paying for housing, things of that nature. Some of you might be paying rent at home. Some of you might be paying for your own car payment or your own cell phone or buying some things here and there, covering some of your expenses, but maybe not all of your expenses. Taking some responsibility for making adult decisions, but still looking to parents to make some decisions with you or for you. And so it's kind of that in between, right? You're kind of in the middle. You're emerging into adulthood. And this makes sense when we are living in a westernized society and we're a fairly wealthy country and our children are afforded the opportunity to kind of gently transition into adulthood, when many of them are going to college and still getting some education and having that extended time of still living with the parents and relying on the parents. And so that affords you some opportunities that maybe other cultures don't have or other generations didn't have, where we were just thrown into adulthood, right? Or maybe we like me, who was a teen mom, we just jumped into adulthood, right? But in emerging adulthood, you have an opportunity to explore your identities through college, through trying out different jobs, through trying out different hobbies, through trying out different relationships. And you might seem like, okay, I tried this out, it doesn't work, so I pull back. Maybe I move out and then I come and move back in because it didn't work out. You know, I found out living with roommates was a little bit more challenging. I found out that the financial commitment was a little too stressful and premature. All of these things, right? And so it might feel unstable. It might feel like you're bouncing in and bouncing out, and that's okay, right? That's all part of the exploration process. It's a time when you have an opportunity to focus on you and develop you and really be intentional about thinking about, what are my values? How do I want to direct my life in a meaningful way? And because you haven't quite figured it out, because you've got one foot over here and one foot over here, you might be feeling in between, and that can be stressful, right? But at the same time, it's a wonderful, liberating position to be in, where you have endless possibilities of kind of shaping your life and yourself in any way that you want to. So lean in and enjoy if you're in that stage. I'm jealous, right? But I certainly have afforded my children that opportunity. Now, remember I said that not all cultures have the luxury of emerging adulthood. So we are a westernized, developed country here in the United States, and we have a fair degree of wealth in terms of, our global positionality relative to other countries. And so, we have privileges, we have opportunities that come with that. And this ability to transition gradually into adulthood is one of those privileges. You do not see those same luxuries afforded to individuals in that age range in developed country or developing countries, where they may be, thrown into an adult role and responsibility even well before the age of 18. And they're taking on, some degree of providing for the family, financially or otherwise. So certainly developed countries, because of their wealth, individual families who tend to have more wealth and economic stability also have those luxuries. So even within developed society, we see the luxury and privileges of emerging adulthood afforded more toward the wealthier families, but lower income families may not have those same opportunities. And then cultural values matter, right? Some cultures value working. Maybe there's gender differences, and the males are pressured to step into the workforce at earlier ages than the females, or maybe the other way around, right? But we certainly do know that whether or not you get to fully realize and enjoy this period of time and the privileges that come with it really are dependent and influenced by culture and your economic status. So as you transition into adulthood, there's certainly some very common life experiences that happen in these early years. And those in many cultures are viewed as rites of passage, including getting married, settling down, having children, maybe going to college, moving out of the house, right? Starting a career. Those are all big things happening at this time period, and they can be wonderful opportunities to celebrate you, and they can also be very liberating, but they can also be stressful. So note that this period of life is actually a very stressful period of life because of all of these major life transitions. Even positive transitions like getting married or having a baby, assuming that baby was even planned for, can actually bring stress. So stress isn't just negative life events, it's also positive life events. Any major transitions bring about stress and anxiety. So know that while we look at these things favorably and while we celebrate these things as a culture, you also need to take care of you during this stage of life, right? Now, when you look at surveys and qualitative research and you ask people, what do you consider the markers of adulthood? How do we know when someone has fully become an adult? They're no longer emerging, but they're actually viewed as an adult. And the common responses are they're financially independent, they're taking care of their own financial obligations and no longer reliant upon parents, and they're responsible. They take responsibility for themselves. They make their own appointments, they manage their own calendars, they take care of their own household needs and responsibilities, all of those things that we consider part of adulting, right? They're doing it on their own. Maybe begrudgingly, maybe not as smoothly as we would want them to. It doesn't matter. They're doing it on their own. They're holding down their own. That is the common view of this, you've made it. In westernized cultures, other cultures might have very firm rites of passage that occur at certain ages. They might have ceremonies that they honor, and you might take on and assume assigned roles based upon your lineage, your birthrights, whatever it might be. But in general, in westernized societies, then you definitely have these more abstract concepts that mark adulthood. Also note that, depending upon whether you come from an individualistic culture, such as the US and many westernized countries, that are grounded in individualistic values, focus on independence, individual success, responsibility, versus collectivist societies, which tend to be more other focused. They look at social unity, social harmony, group well-being over that of your own. We value different things in those cultures, right? And so how we celebrate, how we acknowledge these transitions and these rites of passage vary. And that might impact how you view these rites of passage and how quickly you're pursuing them or not pursuing them, whether they're things that you look forward to or don't. And so do keep in mind that those underlying cultural values are a critical component of how we really view these different life events, not just in emerging and early adulthood, but throughout life. So when we're talking about this period of time, trends have changed, right? Back in the day, in my day, more than half of people in this age range moved out. They were marrying at younger ages. They were living with a significant other, often a spouse, right? But now we don't see that. We see more people putting off marriage till a later age, more people intentionally and consciously putting off children till an older age, more people going to college and building careers rather than just, stepping in with jobs. And so therefore, they are more likely to stay at home longer. And now we have a larger percentage of the population up until age 35 who are still living at home with their parents. That is not uncommon. I have a child in their 30s still living at home. And that's okay, right? And certainly coming from a Native Hawaiian family, multi-generational living is more common in our culture. And so my son could live with me for the rest of his life and I'd be okay. Do I still want him having independence and achieving a career and having some success and joy, based on his own individual interests? Absolutely. But he, being home with me is perfectly fine. I don't know that I feel that way about all my children. Shh, don't tell. Interestingly enough, young men are more likely to stay home longer. And so sometimes he might feel bad and he might feel like he's not hitting the mark. But really and truly, he's right on par with the average statistics. And when we think about everything that's happening in our world and our society, jobs aren't as readily available. Wages have not kept up with cost of living, so it's more expensive to live on your own. Certainly buying a home in the current climate and in this decade is much more improbable than it was in decades and generations past. And so that cost of living, the need for an education, the high, low value to high investment for that education, all of those ratios and factors impact whether one has the liberty to move out, right? Okay, so beyond kind of where you're living and what the age range entails, let's talk about some of the more physical aspects of this developmental domain. Interestingly enough, emerging adulthood is often this time of peak physical performance and strength. So when you think about who goes to the Olympics, right, it's often those people right in that emerging adulthood age ranges because they have, their greatest muscle mass, muscle strength, right, their greatest lung capacity and breathing ability. They're very quick and they can react physically well. So they are really at their peak across all of those physical domains that make their performance ideal, right? But at the same time, quickly into that 30 range, they are already aging and on the decline. So we often think of like over the hill as being midlife, 50s. But in reality, the physical peak, the physiological peak, happens much earlier. And the hill might be a lot longer and wider than we realize, because aging starts as early as 30. We start to see declines in vision, declines in physical functioning. We start to see declines in hearing and other sensory capacity. We start to see declines in our strength. We start to see declines in our endurance. We start to see declines in our appearance, right? Our hair starts going gray or thinning and balding for many men, particularly of European descent. We start to have the wrinkles, right? So at first I was like, gosh, my daughter, who's in her teens, she has this incredible skincare routine, and that shit's expensive too, right? And it's all on my dime. I'm like, damn, I never had that kind of skincare routine. I never thought about that kind of stuff. And I kind of judged her negatively. But I recognized, oh my gosh, she's ahead of the curve, right? Because she's taking care of herself. She's taking care of herself in these areas where, she's going to start to experience aging. And that aging starts earlier than what we realize. So it's better to be proactive rather than reactive. And so know that you should be cherishing that physiological performance. Enjoy it, cherish it, make good use of it. We also know, we've already discussed in all the other lectures and the earlier developmental periods, the risk of obesity and how the U.S. leads the developed world in obesity rates at every developmental period. And that continues and persists into adulthood. And so we're seeing that in early and emerging adulthood, although it's a peak physiological time. In our country, we also have an increasing and persistent risk of obesity. So here we're marking BMI rates for being overweight, obese, and extreme obesity. And here's the average weight. I think it's important to note that BMI was determined by a mathematician, a statistician. It was not done by a social scientist. When we look at these averages, please note that these are really developed based on, white culture, and they don't consider the ethnic influences and variations, right? We do, in fact, have different body compositions, and we have different norms. We have different food consumption practices and food preparation practices across cultures. And so it is important to note that if you don't fit into this particular rate, don't internalize that and don't shame yourself for that, right? Look around your family, your culture, and you can kind of get a feel for what is average within your family, because there are definitely family and cultural variations. And obesity is complex. It's important not to judge people, right? It is comprised of genetic factors, biological factors, yes, behavioral factors, but that are also impacted by biochemical processes outside of our control, as well as psychological and social influences. And so, I want to be cautious, and I want to caution you about judging yourself or others if they happen to fall in these different categories. Now, while we don't want to judge ourselves and impose undue psychological pressure on ourselves, we do want to be mindful, right? We know different causes of obesity and the complexity thereof, and we also need to be mindful of the consequences and how that can impact our long-term well-being and our internal organs, our cardiovascular health, our increased risk of cancer and other diseases that may arise. So we want to do our best to be healthy, to manage our weight in a healthy, constructive way, but in a realistic way as well. And so I'm going to let you work through some of these individual details when we're talking about some of the different causes and contexts that cause obesity, and then also considering the various consequences and impact to our health and to our everyday bodily functioning, as well as to our psychological functioning. And then I also want to address some of the other risk factors. Like, interestingly enough, we have increased risks of premature death in emerging adulthood and early adulthood. And some of this is, because our cognitive reasoning, our frontal lobes are still not fully mature. We're still taking higher risks. And as I mentioned, we are enduring a lot of major life transitions that can bring about a lot of stress that we may not know how to manage as of yet, right? And so consequently, that increases our risks. And so I also want you to know that, injury, homicide, suicide, those are all, mostly car accidents, are increased risks that you face. While there is a risk of cancer and heart disease in these younger early adulthood years, they're not as significant as these other top three. And so we do need to be mindful of this, right? Sadly, this impacts males more than females, and that is the case throughout life. Females outlive males at every developmental period. They're more likely to take risks than females. They also have riskier jobs, different types of responsibility that might put them in harm's way, more so than women as well. But they also are more likely to die in car accidents. They actually have a riskier driving behavior, which is why they pay a higher insurance premium, right? Because the actuaries calculate all this. And sadly, they are actually more likely to engage in alcohol and substance abuse. And all of those things, alcohol and substance abuse in general, which we'll talk about more in a sec, they put you at risk of more accidents, injuries, and health problems thereafter as well. So when we're talking about alcohol abuse, interestingly enough, in the college age years, in that emerging adulthood year time period and going into early adulthood, they're actually at greater risk of drinking and abusing alcohol in very unhealthy ways than at any other time throughout their lifespan. And so we want to be mindful of the high rates of binge drinking. It could be, because, hey, they have some freedom and liberties that they didn't have before. Maybe they're going away to college, they're involved in sororities and fraternities where there's higher rates of drinking, there's more social pressure. It could be that they're moving out of the house, they're not as under as much parental control and influence, they have more freedom to go out with friends. They're driving more, so they have more access in that regard. And so, binge drinking and just the risk and access to alcohol increases so much so, but know that the risks and the dangers increase as well, right? The dangers of accident, injury, addiction, and even death. And so we definitely want to be mindful, and we want to engage in a healthy, constructive dialogue about it. And you actually see colleges taking responsibility. So when you move on and transfer to universities, it's not uncommon that they have educational workshops about alcohol and substance abuse. They have alcohol and substance counseling available to their students. That's part of many of their health centers. And you might actually have peer advisors and peer educators, and those are all wonderful things, right? So if you're engaging in these types of behaviors, be mindful, take care of yourself, put protections in place, and most definitely don't drink and drive. And so I'll let you work through some of these statistics and these numbers. in this class, we really don't talk about disorders as much, but I do want you to be aware of the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's our DSM. It's what outlines the criteria for various mental illnesses, well, for all mental illnesses. And most people don't recognize that alcohol and substance use is, in fact, a psychological disorder. It is outlined in our DSM. There is specific, clear criteria, and a good chunk of college students meet the formal diagnostic criteria for alcohol use disorder. And so, again, take care of yourself, be mindful, put protections in place, and make sure you're not one of the negative statistics, right? And also be mindful that this opens you up for other risks, such as sexual assault. And your risks of sexual assault increase in college years as well. So I just want you to be informed and protect yourself as best as possible. So speaking of the increased risk of sexual assault, I want you to all be aware of Title IX and your Title IX rights. So Title IX is an area of Ed Code that actually helps to hold institutions of higher education accountable to protect your rights. It protects from gender and sex discrimination, which is important, but it also helps to ensure that colleges are actively educating you about sexual assault, domestic violence, stalking, and that relationship violence that you should be aware of. So there are processes that we have to adhere to and resources that we have to make available to students. So if you have concerns about sexual harassment, if you have experienced stalking, relationship violence, sexual assault, or intimate partner violence, domestic violence, you actually have access to a Title IX officer. Every college institution has a Title IX officer. That person is designated with managing Title IX complaints. You can have access to counseling, support services. You can have access to someone that can help advocate for you with your professors. If you are trying to recover from a trauma, maybe you might need to temporarily withdraw or take a leave, or you might need help with some deadlines, or maybe the person who assaulted you is in class with you, and so you need to switch classes. So it can get complex, particularly at the university when you may be living on campus. And so this Title IX is a resource. Know about it. When you transfer to a university, utilize these resources, educate your friends about these resources as well. Attend events and workshops that can help give you knowledge and tools to keep you safe moving forward and to support you in the event that unfortunately you experience one of these negative events. Like alcohol use, substance use can also become problematic. We see that this age range puts you at greater likelihood of potentially engaging in substance use. Often it's cigarettes and marijuana, but we have seen opioid use increase significantly over the last decade to the point where it's reaching epidemic proportions. And so we do want you to be mindful of that. Often that kind of use and addiction starts from a medical prescription, and so we want to be careful about that. It's also not uncommon, sadly, for college students to tap into other prescription drugs like ADD medications to help them optimize cognitive performance and get through exams and finals, and that's not healthy as well, right? So we do want to make you aware of that. Again, be informed, understand the risks that come with these types of behaviors. It might be treated much more casually among your social circles, no big deal, everybody does it, but actually you might be the one that dies or becomes addicted, and it's just not worth it, right? So take care of you, understand that this is a difficult and trying age period, but seek the support and resources to get through it in the healthiest way possible. Okay, let's go into, I'm pretty sure earlier in the semester, we've already addressed differentiating between sex, gender, gender identity. Your book reinforces that the fact that gender is a social construct. So it is something that doesn't naturally occur. Sex is something that naturally occurs based on physiological processes and development. But gender is a social construct, and that social and cultural norms kind of dictate what possibilities and distinctions exist for genders. And then they place expectations and sometimes pressures on what is appropriate behavior for either gender, right? And in current westernized societies, there's expectations often of masculinity and femininity that correspond to a particular gender, and it can be very dichotomous and very binary. And we should know that gender has not been binary. Sex is not binary, right? We've talked about this. Intersex individuals exist as commonly as redheads exist in society. So they represent a fairly large chunk of our population. And if sex isn't dichotomous and binary, then certainly we know that gender isn't either. And that's not a new woke concept. This isn't a new DEI concept. This is actually something that's been recognized throughout humankind. And we know that because it's documented in many indigenous and aboriginal cultures, including Native Hawaiian culture that recognize Mahu, and Native American cultures, and different tribes that recognize what is now collectively known as Two-Spirit. We have similar third gender terminology recognition in Native Filipino cultures, Native Indian cultures, and by that I mean India, Asia. And so it is important to note that, right? That gender is in fact not binary either. And so your book lists out a number of different gender identities that you may in fact represent yourself, or you may encounter individuals that have a gender expansive or gender diverse identity. So I'm going to encourage you, of course, to respect an individual's gender identity, to honor their identity, just as you would a cisgender individual, right? You don't ask for verification when someone is introduced to you, and for that's a cisgender individual. Those demands and expectations are unreasonable to be imposed upon any individual. So I do want to encourage you, particularly if you're hoping to pursue a career in psychology, in the medical field, in the education field, where we have to honor our ethics, right? And where these concepts are established in the social sciences, in the medical sciences, and where we, particularly as psychologists and as a social worker, I need to respect the diversity that exists within the human condition. So sadly, these individuals are often targeted. They face a tremendous amount of prejudice and discrimination. We talk about this in terms of transphobia or homophobia, and phobia is a psychological concept, right? And it relates to an irrational fear. And as it relates to transphobia or homophobia, we talk about the fear of homosexual individuals or transgender individuals. However, I kind of don't like the idea of using trans or homophobia terminology because phobia almost legitimizes it and gives it a pass. Phobia is one of those mental health conditions that are documented in our DSM, our Diagnostic and Statistical Manual. It's a legitimate disorder, right? And homophobia and transphobia is rooted in prejudice. It's rooted in hatred, more so than fear. And so consequently, there's more modern language that reflects that moves it away from the phobia element. And that's transmesia or homomesia. So these can be used interchangeably with transphobia and homophobia, but it moves us away from that phobia language that also corresponds to legitimate diagnosable conditions. And so language matters. And so I want to make sure that we are not unintentionally validating that hatred by referencing it as a phobia. Also, keep in mind, like the words transvestite, even homosexual can have tremendous stigma. Homosexuality and homosexual is still used, but more common modern language is queer or gay, lesbian, rather than homosexual. And that's because of the way in which society has pathologized it, the way in which society has stigmatized it, and can bring about tremendous judgment toward a certain group of individuals. Also, we want to be mindful that we don't talk about a transgender. It's not a noun, it's an adjective. So we say a transgender individual. And we want to use person-centered language, right? We want to make sure that we're describing a person and not objectifying that person. So talking about transgender people, transgender individuals is much more appropriate than talking about or trying to objectify an individual. Okay. And then something to think about, sadly, that has to be talked about is you never ask someone about their genitalia. I don't walk up to a cisgender man or woman and ask them if they have a penis or a vagina, and you should never do such a thing for a transgender individual as well. Asking them about their intentions for surgery is highly inappropriate, disrespectful. If they feel safe in having those conversations, they'll initiate them with you, but never should you initiate those conversations with them. If you are so inclined, you can look up, it's pronounced metrosexual.com, and that is a wonderful website and resource. You can do safe zone training, and you can educate yourself about the diversity of the LGBTQIA community and how you can be a more supportive and informed ally and just citizen. And recognize the levels of discrimination that transgender individuals face is absurd. Excuse me. Excuse me. They are particularly transgender people of color are at greater risk of actually being murdered in our society, in American society, than any other group. They are exposed to such hatred and discrimination. They are harassed, bullied, attacked, assaulted, and murdered because of their gender identity. And sadly, some states allow a defense of fear, of phobia. I was attracted to a transgender woman. I made a pass at her, pursued her, found out she may have had genitalia that I wasn't expecting. Out of fear, I became enraged and murdered them. And in some states, that's actually a viable defense. It's a horrid, horrid defense. I should never be able to talk about fear as a means, unless it's fear for my own life, right? Unless fear because you were threatening bodily harm against me. And that's not the case. My existence should not evoke fear in anyone and not be a justifiable cause for you to harm or even murder me. So, just things to think about. And again, as educators, medical providers, behavioral and mental health professionals, we need to honor gender diversity and sexual diversity. And so sexuality is referencing our sexual attraction to others. Your book talks about it as romantic or sexual attraction, or romantic and sexual attraction. And I'm here to share with you, we do differentiate between romantic attraction and sexual attraction in the social sciences. Some individuals might have an inclination toward sexual behaviors, some may not. Some may have romantic inclinations, but not sexual inclinations. So we do differentiate between those. So when we are talking about sexual orientation or sexuality, we typically are talking about sexual interests and proclivities and attractions, not romantic. Does that make sense? Okay. So human sexuality is really referencing our inclination toward sexual activity, whether that's fantasies, whether that's actual behaviors, whether that's our thoughts. But it's the summation of what do we believe, what do we value, what do we think about these things for ourselves, for others. How does this influence our behaviors, the roles that we play in relationships? And how might that be represented in society as a whole, right? And so we talk about, our biological drives, our libidos, and the sexual response cycle, and the research that's been done to understand what happens physiologically when we're sexually aroused, right? We also talk about our emotional inclination and how do we feel toward people. What kinds of connections and bonds do we develop toward people? Do we feel safe? Do we feel a sense of trust, of caring, of connection? We also talk about those social views and perceptions in terms of our relationships that we might have with prospective romantic or sexual partners, how that might impact our relationships with others, such as our parents, such as our spiritual leaders, such as our friends, because those social expectations, those cultural expectations have consequences. If we don't live up to those expectations, if we step outside of what is quote unquote considered normal, right? That can cause a lot of stress on us. If we have inclinations, interests, and it's not something we choose, right? It's not necessarily something that we are choosing in our behavior, right? We're not choosing to be bad or good. It represents no moral choice, right? It's merely we discover, right? I didn't choose to be attracted to Johnny Borrego when I was in freaking first grade. It just happened to be Johnny Borrego swooped by me and I was like, whew, he affects me differently than the other kids in my class. And I realized very early on that the people that caught my eye and that stirred something in me and gave me, the butterflies in my stomach happened to be boys. And it wasn't until much later in life that a woman caught my eye and stirred that in me, and that was all new for me, that I realized, wow, maybe I'm not 100% heterosexual. And we'll talk about, I think the Kinsey scales come up in your book. I don't know if I bring them up here. Yeah, the Kinsey scales, where we look at it on a continuum rather than a binary. And all of that is related to moving away from this very limited notion that there's only two options. There's not, right? We are complex. We are complex human beings, and so consequently, we experience a range of attractions as well. So when we talk about sexual responsiveness, right, arousal in particular, males typically have their peak in their 20s. Females, it comes a little bit later in their 30s and 40s. What does that mean? That means we might be more assertive. We might be confident in our sexual identities and our sexual interests. We might break away from some inhibitions, and we might be more inclined to engage and pursue our sexual interests than maybe we were at younger periods. I would say some of this could be influenced by societal norms and expectations, where men are empowered at much younger ages and they're more positively affirmed for their sexuality, and women tend to be a lot of it more shamed, and so we may not come into our own, let's say, until later in life because of some of those influences. So the book takes you through the sexual response cycle of Masters and Johnson, where it suggests that we go through different stages of an arousal process. So for those of you who may not have sexual experience, your body physiologically changes when you're engaging in a sexual experience, right? As you're becoming aroused, your heart rate increases, your respiration rate increases, you might actually start to perspire. Individuals with a penis will start to experience an erection. Individuals with a vagina and a clitoris will start to also experience engorgement. The clitoris actually becomes hardened as well, consistent with that of a penis, same exact tissue, right? Then we enter into a period of plateau where it's not quite the same acceleration rate, a more gentle, but we are definitely staying at an elevated rate of arousal, right? As we're engaging in sexual acts. So this often is occurring even in foreplay, leading up to sexual contact. And then during that actual sexual contact, we might have a little bit more elevation, but we're kind of plateauing. And then an orgasm, not all individuals experience an orgasm, but when an orgasm is experienced, then there is an involuntary contraction of the sexual muscles. Most people think the clitoris is just a button at the top of the vaginal opening, but it actually is a much larger organ that is internalized, and so that will actually contract. A penis will contract. Ejaculation occurs, so there's actual sexual fluid released in the glands for individuals that have male or female genitalia, and then that rhythmic contraction, it's perceived often, cognitively and emotionally as a period of tremendous or a point of tremendous pleasure. And then you move into a resolution state where your body starts to return back to a normal heart rate, a normal respiration rate. You stop perspiring, the swelling of your organs and the rhythmic contractions stop, and you return to a normal state. That is what we call the sexual response cycle. Your libido, your sex drive, right? Your motivation and push for engaging in sex is impacted by all of these things. It's impacted by biology, physiology, but it's also impacted by our psychological factors and some of the social pressures, demands, expectations, shame that have been internalized over the years, and it could potentially interfere with this sexual response process. It could interfere with our arousal, it could interfere with our ability to orgasm, and so it is really important to recognize we're whole human beings. So our psychological and social health have a direct impact on our physical functioning, and our physical health has a direct impact on those things as well. So do keep those things in mind. Also be mindful that underlying our bodies is a hormonal cycle and process, particularly for individuals with female sex organs who are exposed to that menstrual cycle and those hormonal cycles, right? And also our brain. Our brain is our largest sex organ. It really is. Our brain releases a number of hormones, and our brain actually directs the entire body in the process. So what you're seeing here is some of the hormones or neurotransmitters released by the hypothalamus in the brain, and that actually communicates with the endocrine system. So all of these are glands, right? The pituitary gland, the pineal gland, the thyroid gland. These are all glands that further release hormones. So the difference between the brain's involvement in our sexual response cycle and our stress response cycle is it releases neurotransmitters that activate different parts of the body and different glands. And then the glands release hormones through our bloodstream, and they have more global effects. The brain releases these neurotransmitters that are specific directors and cues to specific organs or glands, and the hormones are more global cues to the body at large. And so here's some of the many hormones and neurotransmitters released throughout the body as part of that sexual response. And so it's a really complex process, all of which can be impacted by stress, by psychological perceptions, and by the internal shaming that might take place. So taking you through the process a little bit more thoroughly, you can see the associated response for the different neurotransmitters and hormones that are released. The oxytocin neurotransmitter is also referred to as the bonding hormone. It's released not just during lactation, but orgasm. And so as we're breastfeeding, we release oxytocin. It actually causes our uterus to contract. So that's a good thing because it helps us, lose that pregnancy belly. But also it's what causes the lactation and the letdown reflex in your breast so you can generate milk. And it also is released during orgasm. So in both of those experiences, you're more inclined to get emotionally connected to your partner due to that oxytocin, which is why it's called the bonding hormone. And then you can see the role that some of these other hormones play in effectively that reproductive cycle, right? In addition to understanding the complexity of our hormones and our bodies, we also need to understand the complexity of diseases and the risks of diseases that are out there. So I want to differentiate between sexually transmitted infections and sexually transmitted diseases. Infections can be treated, diseases persist and remain. So often sexually transmitted infections are often bacterial based, and they can be treated by antibiotics. Some of them can cause diseases, right? Sexually transmitted diseases now start to interfere with our normally bodily functions, and they can persist and be chronic, sometimes lifelong, like herpes, right? HPV is an interesting virus, human papillomavirus. It's an interesting virus because it acts as an infection for many, and it's short term, and the body takes care of itself, and it eventually goes away. Very common. I've heard statistics as high as 70 to 80% of the entire U.S. population will get HPV at some point in their life, most of whom won't even know that they ever had it. For some, though, the body doesn't beat it, and it becomes an underlying chronic disease that then puts us at greater risk for cancers like cervical cancer, penile cancer, anal cancer. And so we do need to be mindful. Thankfully, they now have a vaccine. It was introduced first in Europe and Australia, and we saw their rates of cervical cancer declined significantly after implementing the vaccine in those countries. And we're now seeing similar results in the U.S. now that it's readily available and built into the vaccine schedule. And it's offered to both males and females, which is wonderful now. So if you're, I think, under the age of 45, you're still eligible. I highly recommend you talk to your doctor about it. Other common STIs that are listed here and or STDs are here, and a little bit of descriptors. I certainly do recommend that you be educated, be informed, have conversations with sex partners about their status, whether they've been recently tested or not. Planned Parenthood is an excellent resource for sexual health, and so they can help provide testing on a sliding scale based on income levels. Most counties, cities, islands have some sort of health clinic for low-income individuals that can help with this kind of thing, and might be able to help you access vaccines, diagnostics, and treatment that might be available, as well as counseling, as well as support, as well as education. All of those things are important. So when we talk about sexuality, yes, we are sexual beings, right? We're also social beings. And so sadly, society puts a lot of pressures on us, and it impacts our sexual identities and our sexual functioning. And most of those stem from different philosophies or different religions. And depending upon your views and perspectives, many of those can be negative. They can cause internalized shame, fear, regret, and we need to be cautious about those things, right? Shame and regret don't often help us have healthier behavior and engagement. So please be mindful and talk to someone that's affirming, that's supportive, that's inclusive. Build a social support system that helps you counter your own self-shaming narrative and that own inner critic. That's important. We're also influenced by media, right? That's another way of sending these social messages, the should messages. You should do this, you should be that. I say, fuck all that, right? You should be informed, you should be educated, you should be empowered, and you should make educated decisions with your body. You should engage in critical examination and reflection of your own sexual values and make the decisions that align with your beliefs, values, and sexual identity and desires. Those are your decisions to make. And so I'm going to encourage you to turn out that external noise, tune into yourself and that self-reflection time, and be intentional about deciding who you want to be, and the engagement and behavior that you want to engage in that's appropriate for you. So those are just my thoughts. I want you to honor your culture to the extent that you feel is appropriate for you, but I don't want to see you internalizing a lot of harmful views and stereotypes that are detrimental to your well-being. So choose you. And so we talked a little bit about orientation. Again, it's not binary, it's not dichotomous. Here's the Kinsey scale that's saying that it is in fact a continuum. So you're not 100% heterosexual, homosexual. You might fall somewhere along that continuum. I thought I fell mostly heterosexual. Kinsey actually says very few people do. The majority are mostly heterosexual, or, exclusively engaging in same-sex relationships or having same-sex attractions. But, most of us are not most, those of us that are heterosexual are often mostly heterosexual. See what I'm saying? It's not either or. And so here are some different orientations you might hear referenced. Some of the more common, like gender, there are a number of different orientations. And so please be mindful. But some of the more common, you might hear, heterosexual, we're attracted to a different gender than our own. Homosexual, we're attracted to someone that has the same gender as us. Bisexual, you're attracted to two genders. Pansexual, doesn't matter. Gender is not really the basis of attraction. And asexual may not want to engage or have the inclination to have sexual relations at all. And that's okay. When we're talking about sexual orientation, know that it's complex, right? The human body's complex. Look at all these hormones involved in sex. Look at all the complexity of obesity. Look at all the complexity of, peaking and aging all at once, right? The human body is complex. Human beings are complex. Of course, orientation and sexuality is going to be complex as well. It's not something we choose. It's not a behavior. It's not a moral choice. It is something we discover about ourselves. Maybe you discovered later in life you didn't like fish. You didn't like peas. I don't like lima beans, right? They make me gag and want to throw up. It's something I discovered. How did I discover it? I ate a lima bean. And I was like, whoa, this is gross. And then I had another lima bean. And I'm like, yeah, this is gross. This doesn't do it for me, right? I discovered it. It's not something I choose. I don't choose to not like lima beans. I just don't like them, right? And that is the same with orientation. Your body has an arousal response. You become aware of it. You're like, yeah, shit. This particular gender arouses me in ways that are different than others. And that's how we come about discovering our orientation. That may happen at different life stages. Most commonly, it happens in childhood, middle childhood, early elementary school. Think about your first crush. When did you have your first crush? I had mine literally in first grade with Johnny Barrigo. Literally. So waiting to talk about sex and attraction in your body until high school is way too late. Those conversations and education needs to be happening as early as elementary school. Even earlier, we want to teach our children about bodily autonomy and about naming the parts of their body and giving them the power to decide, and to say no to people touching parts of their body. And that's what I mean by bodily autonomy. empowerment, consent. It needs to happen when they're babes, right? We use different language, we do it in age-appropriate ways, but research shows that having those conversations progressively over the lifespan is more effective than our current approach. So we do have biological elements that contribute to orientation. There are genetics, right? We compare what you might know as an identical twin, which is a monozygotic twin where they came from the same egg and it split in half accidentally through the process of mitosis in utero, and it made two babies instead of one. They share 100% of the same genetics. Compared to dizygotic twins, where they were actually two separate eggs released at the same time, both fertilized, so they share the womb and that prenatal period, but they do not share 100% of the same genetics. They share as much genetics as any other sibling, right? There is a significantly higher concordance rate. So when one twin is born as gay, what is the likelihood of the other twin being gay? Concordance, okay? Shared identity or outcome. And we compare that between monozygotic and dizygotic twins. Interestingly enough, the concordance rate for dizygotic twins, for shared similar sexuality among dizygotic twins, two separate eggs, is somewhere around 30%. For monozygotic twins that came from the same egg, identical twins that came from the same egg, I've seen studies as high as in the 80%. So what's the difference? Genetic similarity. That tells us that genetics have to play a more significant role in sexual orientation, right? And so this is the case whether twins are reared together or raised apart, right? I think your book talks about somewhere around 50% concordance rates for monozygotic twins. We also know that that there is hormonal influence, right? We do see when there are hormonal conditions that cause higher rates of androgens or male sex hormones, the female fetuses are more likely to be gay, to be lesbians. We also see in utero that there can be exposure with a male developing fetus. The rates of kind of male hormone and influence affects male fetuses in subsequent births differently than early births. So let's say, the first 2, 3, 4 sons are heterosexual. The more male siblings one has, the greater probability that the younger male sibling is gay. And so all of these suggest that there are underlying biological elements and genetic elements that influence orientation. And some research has been done looking at identifying specific genes related to it. In spite of this massive body of literature that shows that this is a normal part of the human condition, that it's existed since the beginning of humankind, well documented in a number of indigenous and aboriginal cultures, well documented in science, documented biological, hormonal, and other biological genetic, hormonal, and other biological influences, and yet we still have all this stigma, and yet we still judge them as being immoral, and yet we are still trying to strip their rights away, and yet we label them as abnormal, when in reality, diversity and variation of the human existence is normal. And guess what? Without diversity, we would die. If there wasn't genetic diversity that causes the diversity in what we look like, how we think, how we believe, how we behave, how our bodies function, how our attractions function, how we identify. There wasn't diversity in all of those areas, right? And we didn't have the genetic diversity that causes all of that. One virus or bug could take us all out. COVID could have wiped out the whole human species. Any disease could come along and wipe out all of it. It's the genetic diversity that creates resilience. It's that biological diversity that creates resistance, protection. Guess what? Social, emotional diversity does the same. And so just keep that in mind as you're advancing in your education, and particularly if you're looking to step into any kind of human services field, whether it's medical, educational, or you're looking to become a social worker or a behavioral health, mental health professional. Please keep those things in mind. You want to avoid cisnormativity. You want to avoid the assumption that being cisgender is normal and anything outside of that is abnormal. You want to avoid the assumption of heteronormativity. Oh, you just got married? Who's your husband? Who's your wife, right? Be careful about that. Don't make false assumptions of heterosexuality. Recognize gender is diverse. Sexuality is diverse. So step away from these assumptions that cisgender is normal, heterosexuality is normal, and move away from homomismia, bimismia, mismisia, or transmisia. Move away from those things where you perpetuate negative attitudes toward these groups. Educate your loved ones who retain these negative attitudes, who buy into these concepts that are, looking at the history of humankind, newer than what we know has existed for generations and centuries before. So that's it for physical development. I'm going to move into cognitive now. You're welcome to take a break, stop the video, but I'm going to keep going. So when we're talking about cognitive development, of course, we're talking about the mental processes, the thinking, the language, the problem solving, perceptions, things of that nature. Of course, we're going to draw on Piaget, which you've heard before. So now we're moving into, we talked about sensory motor and that infancy, toddlerhood, and then in early childhood and that early part of middle childhood, they experience a pre-operational thinking. In middle to late childhood, they move into concrete operational thinking. And then in adolescence, they potentially embrace formal operations. Or emerging adulthood, they might still be developing formal operational thinking. So moving from cognition based upon our sensory experiences and our motor development to now thinking that's a little bit more advanced beyond just senses and movement, and we can now start to think about symbolic thought. We can now hold memories. We now have object permanence. However, we're still very egocentric and limited in our perspective. To now we move into, I'm now capable of engaging in concrete operations. It's very logical. It's very rule-based. I'm looking at comparisons, relationships, organizing, structuring, seriation, class inclusion, hierarchies, right? I also have this, I'm mastering conservation, so understanding that something remains the same even if its appearance changes. I can pour a cup of water from a short fat glass into a tall skinny glass and it's the same amount of water, right? So there aren't actual substantive changes to things like liquid, weight, volume, mass, just because I change its appearance or shape. And then beyond that, advancing into formal operations, now there's deductive reasoning. Now there's dialectical thought. Now there's abstract reasoning. And it becomes a much more complex adult-like thinking. sometimes happens in adolescence can continue to happen in emerging adulthood. And now it's important to note, Piaget said not everybody achieves formal thinking, right? But then even beyond formal thinking, we now have post-formal thought. And post-formal thought really expands on this notion of deductive reasoning, and it goes into dialectical thinking. Deductive reasoning, I'm deducing or drawing conclusions. I'm coming to an informed perspective based on a logical and scientific evaluation of the evidence. I have these larger, broader, abstract concepts such as, justice, fairness, right? Liberty, freedom. These things now resonate with me, and I have the ability to understand them. I don't need something concrete right in front of my face. Now expand on that even further, right? Particularly in a world and in a society where we rely on this kind of dichotomous two-party system, right? It's Republican versus Democrat, Republican versus Democrat. Dialectical thinking allows you to evaluate both. It allows you to evaluate the pros and cons of both. It allows you to say, well, these aren't all bad and these aren't all good, or these aren't all bad and these aren't all good. Maybe there's good and bad for both. Maybe in certain areas, one party might have a more balanced and healthy and inclusive perspective, and in other areas, the other party might have it. Or maybe in choosing, whatever it is in life that I face, I recognize, it's maybe not pro-life or pro-choice. That this is complex, right? And that if I try to go all pro-life and now I cut off options for individuals who experience complexities in their pregnancy, and without an abortion, it could potentially cost them their lives. Or, for sexual assault survivors, the psychological trauma that is inflicted upon them by having to carry their perpetrator's fetus to term. Like, I consider the value of those opposing views, and I come to a more balanced perspective for myself. One that does not force me to choose one view over the other. And so education can sometimes help people understand the value of dialectical thought and reasoning. It gives us more informed perspectives and opinions. It also exposes us to greater diversity and helps us recognize there are other ways of looking at this. There are other cultural processes, values, structures, and influences that might need to be considered. So some of it could come from education, just life experience, the maturity that just happens with the brain naturally. And some of it could be, I have a specific experience in my life, or something specifically happened to me, or I learned something or ran across something that might inspire this. Again, not everybody reaches formal thinking, so certainly not everybody achieves post-formal thinking as well. And it's sad because our world could benefit from it. So let's move into career development. This is actually a really cool aspect of emerging adulthood. Sadly, we start to pressure even, as little as kindergartners and first graders about career. And I know a lot of my students, they feel that pressure, right? And they feel like they should have it all figured out, and they should know what they're going to major in, and they should know their career. And sadly, even our financial aid processes kind of force that upon them right out the gate as soon as they start taking college classes. And in reality, most people still need time to figure stuff out. You don't have to have it all figured out. And even if you do, often you change your mind along the way, and that's normal too. So a good chunk of our society has only a high school diploma. We have an increasing number of individuals in emerging and early adulthood who are going to college and getting their college degrees. And we also have people continuing to pursue college well into middle and some even in late adulthood. And that's all a beautiful thing. My mom was 59 when she got her bachelor's degrees and 61 when she got her master's. So it's never too late. Sadly, that often comes with debt in American society. It strikes me as being odd when we give so much foreign aid to other countries, including like Israel. And I don't know if you know, but they get to go to college for free. They have free medical care for every citizen. And yet in our society, we don't. In American society, we don't have free college education. In fact, we pay a considerable price. We pay more for our college education here in the United States than relatively than what other developed countries pay. And the majority of us take on huge debt, with the average debt being right around $30,000. When you go on to grad school, your average debt increases significantly. I think the average debt is around $80,000 coming out of master's programs. Now, some people say, it's not worth it. Particularly with AI, it's not worth it. But sadly, the statistics show otherwise. And we show that the greater the level of education, the lower the risk of unemployment, even in recessions. And so there is a job security that comes with having a college degree. There also is a higher wage. And so on this end, you see the average wage associated with the different degree levels. Notice that it goes up with the degree, with the exception of comparing a professional to a doctoral degree. And then unemployment rates go down. So your income goes up, your unemployment rate goes down based on the level of degree. And so those are important factors. Yes, maybe you don't need a college education to have a good job. Maybe you don't. But college educations are associated with more stable careers that offer a higher average wage than what you would find in career options without those degrees. There's always exceptions, right? Know that. And if you have an entrepreneurial spirit and you're successful, cultivate it. Still get your college education to fall back on, because you can even take college courses that can help you become more successful in those entrepreneurial adventures. So, just my 2 cents, but you do you. So there's a couple of different theories related to career, and so I'm going to go over this constructivist theory that really talks about how over our lifespan we're really constructing our career goals, career identities, career concept, and so it is starting as early as childhood, where you may have had this, I want to be a doctor, I want to be a firefighter. They're often dreams of becoming something that we idealize and that we idolize, right? And so more of the glamour, the fame. We move into more practical considerations in our adolescent years when we start to become more keenly aware of our skills, our abilities, our talents, and even our limitations. And so we start to adjust our career goals, morph our career goals, and actually set those around our self-perceptions. And then as you move into your late teens and emerging adulthood, now you start to think about the more nitty-gritty details. How much does it pay? What type of work environment? What kind of working conditions? What are the hours? How does this support my lifestyle goals? Does this let me be the person I want to be? Does it let me engage in the hobbies I want to engage in? Does it align with my values and my life goals? And if it does, then now that career is more appealing for you. And then finally, when we get into our 30s, we're kind of settled into our careers by now. And that doesn't mean we don't change jobs, because we might, right? More opportunity, better wages, a different work environment, maybe we move, whatever it might be. But we kind of stay within the same career. And we might advance and shift within different jobs, but within the same realm and career. And this is particularly the case if we have a career that is tied to our college education. And that's often why careers that come out of college educations tend to often be more stable. There's also a systemic approach that looks at all of the different influences, both of the past, the present, and the future, that impact our individual perceptions and the career that we pursue as a result. So we take all of these things about ourselves, right? All of those things in our social and cultural environment throughout our lives, and that collectively influences the careers that we value and that we choose to pursue. And sometimes it means that it's just those careers that we have access to, particularly for families in lower socioeconomic groups. It's about access. Do they have access, freedom, liberty, privilege of going to school in an affordable way? Do they have access to careers? Do they even know these different career options are out there, right? Have they even been given the social and intellectual capital and opportunity to explore their own interests, to develop those talents and those skills in a way that's meaningful for them? And so all of those things systemically can influence their career pursuits. And then Holland actually is a very specific personality theory that suggests that your personality absolutely predicts your success and fulfillment in a particular career. Excuse me. Holland suggests that if we pursue a career that aligns with our personality, we are going to enjoy that job more. We are going to excel in that job and be more productive and successful, and that we are going to have a healthier overall psychological and social well-being as a result. So have you heard the saying, find a job that you love and you'll never work a day in your life? That's effectively aligning with Holland's career personality theory, that suggests that each personality has very distinctive values, skills, interests, and those align and are suited toward different types of careers. And if you're in alignment, just like in a relationship, right? If you're in alignment, there's going to be greater harmony and greater benefits. And so the 6 different career types, this is the Holland's hexagon, and the ones across from one another tend to be opposite, right? So a conventional is kind of like a bookkeeper. They like data. They like to be organized, orderly, very detail-oriented, manuals, procedures, policies, right? Accountants. Across from that is the artistic personality that actually they don't want to be constrained in a box. They want individual expression. They like variation, variety, choice. They want to have liberty to be creative. So it's not about following structure. It's about building their own ideas and environment and what's right for them. So it's giving them that freedom, right? And individuals who have an artistic personality, they might best align with careers that aren't as rigid. Yes, of course, the arts, actors, dancers, singers, all of that, but also things like, graphic design, things like communications, right? Where they get to have some individual freedom of expression. You also have your realistic personalities, which are much more practical. They're often hands-on. They like to do things. They don't like to be stuck in an office environment per se, but they very much are practical. And they can still be very scientific. They can still be methodical in their approach, but just not in that very detailed, data-driven way. There's a little bit of variety and hands-on where they have something tangible they're often working with. So these can definitely be vets, firefighters, police officers, things of that nature. Investigative, these are your scientists, your thinkers, your problem solvers. They definitely want to go through that scientific method and that empirical process of observing, analyzing, evaluating, drawing conclusions, figuring out the whys, problem solving, right? So any kind of science field, any deep thinking, problem solving field falls into investigative. We've covered artistic. There's social, which are the people that like to help others, that like to be around others. So they value educating other people, informing, inspiring other people. And they tend to be the people that we look to, that guide us, our teachers, our educators, often going into some of the health professions as well, right? Because they want to help others. They want to make a difference. So many people in this class fall into, may have those personality traits. They might need to draw upon other traits as well, but not uncommon. And then there's your enterprising personalities. These are often the people that are very persuasive. They like to argue and debate. They're about performance and achievement, sometimes competition. They like to influence people. Maybe they like to convince or lobby. And so these are, in fact, your lawyers and your lobbyists. And sometimes your advisors, right? Because they have to sway you. So I am going to have you do a learning activity that allows you to assess your own personality type. And I want you to really do some thoughtful analysis of how it aligns with your prospective career goal. What characteristics and traits and skills will serve you well and serve as strengths, and what might be a little bit more, not barriers, but things that you might have to fulfill in other areas of your life. So think about that. So now I'm going to move into social and emotional development. Again, this is a great place to pause. So feel free to stop the video, take a break, walk around, go get some water, a snack, or continue to move on if it suits you. Get up and stretch at least maybe. So going into social and emotional development, another learning activity opportunity is your personality theory that aligns with the 5-factor model, or it's a trait personality theory. And this theory suggests that there are 5 personality traits that shape us differently. And so we fall, on a continuum of openness, from being a little bit more closed off to more open, from being not as conscientious to conscientious, from being introverted to extroverted, being a little bit more difficult and resistant to agreeable, and being emotionally stable to a little bit more neurotic. I should kind of do that opposite. The first 4, so we call this the OCEAN theory. OCEAN is the acronym that stands for each of these traits or characteristics: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. Openness refers to our willingness to try new things, to consider alternative perspectives, openness to new ideas, new activities, new hobbies, openness to alternative views, openness to someone else's ideas and suggestions and interests. Conscientiousness refers to one's sense of responsibility, duty. Are they reliable? Do they get things done on time? Can you count on them to show up when they say they're going to be there? Are they going to follow through? Extroversion refers to the degree of socializing and social energy one has. Are they extroverted and they openly share, and they're more energetic around other people, and a little bit more outgoing and dynamic? Or are they more introverted, where they're less energetic around other people and have more energy, focus, motivation when they're by themselves? They like to really keep to themselves. They prefer more individual activities, more individual planning and productivity time. Agreeableness refers to really how easy to get along with is this person. Are they difficult? Are they resistant? Are they argumentative? Or are they pretty easygoing, laid back, easy to please, really easy to compromise with, right? There's a give and take. There's a good, healthy balance there. Neuroticism is emotional stability or instability, actually. Emotional instability. So someone that's neurotic is a little bit like this emotionally. Somebody that's not neurotic and has low neurotic skills is going to be a little bit more stable emotionally. A smaller range of emotional fluctuation. Someone that's neurotic and emotionally unstable might have higher levels of insecurity, anxiety, stress. They might be more perfectionists. They might pressure themselves and others, right? So they might be more demanding and impose higher standards on themselves and others. And, they might be more moody, and that can be sometimes challenging. So people, these are more positive, the first four, and the last one is more negative. People actually indicate that, higher levels of openness are welcomed in relationships, social, professional, and romantic. Higher levels of conscientiousness. Extroversion can depend. Certainly initial attractions are fueled when people are more extroverted, and then agreeableness is something that's highly desired in relationships as well. And you can consider how these different traits might impact you in your professional realm as well, right? How they might affect you in your family, in your career, and in your romantic relationships. One other way to kind of self-examine is also through attachment styles. I think we talked about Bowlby attachment styles in infancy and toddlerhood, right? And we identified these 4 key attachment styles that are influenced largely by our primary attachment figure and our primary caretaker, that establishes kind of a pattern and expectation and creates a model by which we inform future relationships or maintain future relationships. And that is what's called our internal working model. That's internalized in our unconscious, but manifested in our relationships. So secure attachment style contributes to healthier sense of self, right? I'm really secure with who I am, so I tend to be really secure in my relationships. I'm comfortable bonding, connecting. I don't really have trust or jealousy issues. I value myself and my goals, but I also value us and I value you as an independent being. So I'm focused on our interdependence, right? My independence and our collective needs as well. So they can set boundaries, they can support you having your life and your friends, and they can also have their own. So it tends to be just a healthier, stable relationship. So now those attachment styles that we talked about in infancy and toddlerhood now become these models for us in these adult, emerging and early adult relationships. And this is how they are manifesting now in our adult relationships. Anxious, or anxious ambivalent, right, is that relationship that's volatile. It's more neurotic, right? They can be really clingy. It's a love-hate. They can be needy. It can be based on deep-seated insecurity, which can create dependence and codependence. So they're so incessantly afraid of losing their partner, they might actually push them away because they're afraid of being abandoned. They're afraid of being rejected. They're afraid of disappointing someone. And that manifests in different ways. Avoidant are the people that are a little bit more void of attachment, closeness, bonding, connection. So, they might be overly narcissistic, or they might actually have a low self-esteem altogether. But either way, it contributes to an unhealthy relationship where they really don't invest themselves emotionally. They really are overly independent and self-reliant and autonomous, that they really don't take time to get to know the needs and support the needs and meet the needs of their partner. And they may not be prioritizing the relationship to the degree that it's needed. They might be a little bit more closed off and closed in, and that can cause challenges in a relationship. And then the fearful and disorganized, that often comes for a number of reasons in infancy and toddlerhood, often associated with a diagnosable condition. That can also manifest in adult relationships, where they might have a fear of connection to others for various reasons, or negative perceptions of themselves or others for various reasons. So they also might avoid closeness, or they might also be clingy. It's kind of a little bit more unpredictable, with varying degrees of fluctuation in their relationship and in their emotional expression. Now, Bartholomew kind of did a variation, a spin on Bowlby's attachment theory, and he suggested that there's two kind of main continuums that impact attachment styles. He suggested that you have attachment-related anxiety or attachment-related avoidance, right? So when we're talking about attachment-related anxiety, how much do I worry and stress about whether my partner is attached to me, whether they love me? So this is effectively like my degree of fear of being rejected, of being abandoned, right? How much am I afraid of them really loving me for me? And attachment-related avoidance is really now about not my fear of others, but really me. Can I open up? Can I be close? Can I let someone in? Can I create interdependence and connection? So how comfortable am I opening up? And you can have low anxiety or high anxiety, and you can have low avoidance or high avoidance. And if you have high avoidance and high anxiety, we call that a fearful avoidant attachment style. If you have high avoidance and low anxiety, you might have a dismissing avoidant style. And then in high anxiety and low avoidance, it's a preoccupied style, consistent with generally the same attachment styles Bowlby described, or the same manifestations that Bowlby described, different terms and different impetus for, right? So he's just saying this is going into attachment anxiety, like how anxious or nervous am I about my partner's willingness to attach to me, or attachment-related avoidance, how comfortable am I being willing to open up and attach to my partner, right? So different impetus rather than the internal working model, still breaking into 4 categories that manifest in very similar ways as was described in Bowlby's attachment theory. In terms of attachment relationship, we definitely know secure attachments are more likely to lead to healthy, productive, long-lasting relationships. We definitely know that insecure attachments and attachment-related anxiety can definitely contribute to more high conflict relationships. When you tend to be avoidant, you're not as willing to bond and connect to your partners, and therefore they're not as bonded and connected to you, so those relationships may not be as supportive. We do show that sometimes when you're younger, you're more anxious and worried about whether someone loves you. As you get older and you move into middle adulthood, some of that worry goes away. So it's interesting for me dating in middle adulthood post-divorce compared to, maybe the me that dated in my early 20s, where this one I was like, do they like me? Am I good enough? And now I'm like, fuck yes, I'm good enough. Are they good enough for me? Right? So it's just a very different perspective. Now it's more about, am I willing to open up, or am I going to let some of those traumas from my past relationships impact me and increase my level of avoidance, right? I'm a firm believer that vulnerability breeds intimacy. So one of the values I've created for myself is a willingness to always be genuine and authentic with my intention and desires for a relationship, even if that means I'm going to be rejected. Even if that means I'm going to be turned down. That's okay. I want to be true to me. I want to be authentic and vulnerable. And because what I don't want is to miss an opportunity for a close, healthy relationship because I was too afraid to put myself out there, right? So vulnerability breeds intimacy. Share yourself authentically and wholly, and an intimate relationship and connection and bond will develop where it's meant to be, where it's compatible and appropriate. Just my 2 cents, not that you asked. Okay, so as we're moving along Erikson's psychosocial theory of development, assuming we've had healthy, wonderful, nurturing development and healthy social influences, we fostered a strong sense of trust. We're autonomous. We take initiative. We're industriousness. We have a strong, comfortable, secure sense of identity. Sometimes this identity versus role confusion is still playing out into emerging adulthood. And by young adulthood, I'm now firmly in, or early adulthood, I'm firmly in intimacy versus isolation, and looking at forging intimate relationships, forging my own family connection, forging my family of procreation if I choose to have children, or just my chosen family relationship if I don't choose to have children. So these are the 2 stages that are most prominent. It's really important to note that, remember we talked about moratorium and that active exploration. It's okay to continue to explore well into emerging adulthood and even into early adulthood. Exploration and moratorium can be a wonderful thing. Take the time to really get to know yourself. Self-reflection is critical. Understand your values, your drives, your interests, and be intentional. Be intentional in pursuing the career that's right for you, and definitely be intentional about pursuing the partner that is right for you. So don't get caught up in, oh, I'm supposed to be in a relationship. I'm supposed to be getting married. I'm supposed to be having children. No. Be intentional and thoughtful about building a partnership that's healthy for you, and that meets your intimate needs, whatever those may be. And try to resist the outside noise as much as you can, so that you can be true to you first and foremost. Okay, so let's talk about what are the things that draw us to a partner anyway. Well, first of all, similar, you hear opposites attract. Interestingly enough, we might attract, but we don't always stay together when we're opposite. Actually, what's more likely to attract us to a partner is similarity. Think about your friends. Who are your closest friends? They're often people that you have things in common with. shared values, shared beliefs, shared interests, shared activities, something, right? You typically are bonded by commonalities, more so than opposites. So similarity is a key element of attraction. Self-disclosure, vulnerability, opening up, that openness, right? Put yourself out there. Yes, it hurts if you're rejected. Yes, it hurts when people don't accept you. Yes, it hurts when people aren't empathetic, right? But guess what? Give them a chance to show you those traits and qualities. And be true to you, because maybe they do reject you, but then maybe that's just not the person for you, right? I don't want to put on masks. I don't want to be fake. I want to be me. I want to be wholly, authentically me. Because you know what? If you can't love me now, you're not going to be able to love me later, right? So I want to be me. I don't want you to fall in love with the fake me. I want you to fall in love with the real me. Proximity matters. Closeness. How can you develop a relationship if you don't have that opportunity to get together, to spend time together, to do things together, to talk to one another, right? And mere exposure matters. So, hey, maybe they said no this time, but the more they see you, the more they get to know you, the more you're having shared activities together, the more likely they are to say yes in a future date. So, we tend to like and gravitate towards stimuli that we see more frequently and often. Keep that in mind. Use that however you may. When it comes to adult friendships, they're very different, thank God, than our adolescent friendships, right? They become more stable. They're more intimate. We tend to be closer with one another. We've disclosed more. We tend to share ourselves more. We tend to know ourselves better. So they can be built on greater emotional closeness. Friendships themselves can be very valuable. They can be our greatest asset in life. In terms of psychology, your support system is one of your greatest assets. It is a strong predictor of your physical and psychological health. And so I think building good, solid, quality friendships is critical and essential. And if we aren't married, right, our friendships are even more valuable. But be careful about throwing your friendships aside and giving all of your time and attention to a romantic or intimate partner. Make sure you're balancing those things, right? Because you don't want to alienate your friends who have been there for you. And a healthy partner is going to want you to have healthy friendships. So make sure you're balancing those things. In terms of male friendships, they're a little bit different than female friendships. Male friendships are often activity-based. They want to get in and solve problems. They're not here just to listen and talk to one another and affirm and support one another. They're often really fact-based, but solution-oriented, if that makes sense. And female friendships, we do tend to share all of ourselves and vomit our life out with one another and talk about our problems, and not even talking about our problems to the extent that we want to fix them, but just that we want to vent about them. We may want to hear other perspectives, we may not, right? So it's important to establish that in that communication. How would you like me to respond in this situation? Are you sharing just to vent? Are you looking for affirmation and support? Are you looking for solutions? What would you like me to do? Do you want me to just listen? Do you want me to offer some feedback? Do you want me to offer suggestions? And then it's, sometimes we have mixed sex relationships, right? And there's this whole long-standing debate of, can you be friends without a sexual interest? It's quite often mixed sex relationships can lead to a romantic relationship. That's not uncommon, but it is important to note that, y'all have to be honest and communicative with one another, be open and transparent about your intentions, and then consider how that might impact other romantic relationships that you pursue. So I really am a believer in just transparency, openness, and authenticity. And all of those qualities can help build meaningful quality love in one's life. So this is Sternberg's triangular theory of love. He suggests that there's different types of love and relationships, and it's built on 3 key ingredients: intimacy, passion, and commitment. Passion is more of the physical, sexual stuff. Intimacy is more of the closeness, the emotional vulnerability stuff. How well do I know you as a person? This is how well do I know your body and want to please your body and be pleased by your body. And then commitment is just that, our commitment to each other and to the relationship. These 3 things combine. They combine to create different types of love, different types of relationships. You can have just one ingredient. So when you have just passion, he called that an infatuation. And that is, hey, I'm infatuated with the person sexually. You can have just intimacy without any passion or commitment, and that's liking. That's a friendship, right? You can have just commitment with no intimacy and no passion, and that's just an empty love. 2 ships passing in the night, right? Coexisting. Now, when you combine passion and commitment, that creates fatuous love, right? We've committed to each other, and it's really this great sexual dynamic relationship, but we may not know each other that well because it's lacking intimacy. You can combine passion and intimacy and not have commitment, and that's what we call a romantic love, right? This is often the beginning of a couple where they like each other, they're getting to know each other, they're having great sex, they're enjoying one another, but they haven't made a commitment as of yet. Sternberg's theory really defined commitment more around marriage. In today's day and age, it may or may not represent marriage, so you decide what constitutes commitment to you, right? Now you can combine intimacy with just commitment, and that's a companionate love, right? They may not have sex. Many older relationships that have been together for 40 and 50 years and who are a little bit more advanced in life and may not have the same sexual inclination or functioning anymore, they might be perfectly content and satisfied with a companionate love. Or some of us just have friendships where we're absolutely committed to one another and we have a close, intimate connection with one another, but there's no sex, and that can be a wonderful friendship as well. Sternberg suggested that ideal love combines all 3, and that's what he called consummate love. That is a fulfilling whole love. Now, you can have different relationships that represent these different types of love throughout your life. You can also have one relationship go through stages and seasons. And so at different points in your lives and relationship, it may have manifested different types of love. And that's normal. Either is normal. So you decide the qualities that are most important to you. Not everybody wants to pursue a romantic, committed marriage relationship, right? Some people are perfectly content being single. More people are choosing to remain single and not get married now than they ever have before. So this is an increasing lifestyle choice, and that's okay. Now, most people declare that they want to get married at some point, but they are going to consciously and actively choose to be single for a number of reasons. And so you hear some of those reasons why people aren't married or why they're staying single outlined here. You also have a hookup culture that is increasing in today's society, not just in the younger generations, but in the older generations post-divorce, right? And a hookup is when you're not committed to this person, you're just getting together and connecting for sex. Now, hopefully there's been really good dialogue. Y'all have talked about safe sex. You're practicing safer sex approaches and using condoms and getting tested and being mindful. Sadly, we see Even in older generations, like in nursing homes where hooking up is happening more and more, STDs are happening too. So make sure you're being safe about it. Interestingly enough, we have a greater portion of the population reporting having had a hookup at least once in their lifetime at younger ages. Friends with benefits, it's more than just hookup. I'm not connecting with this person just for sex, but this person actually is a friend, and then we also help meet each other's sexual needs on occasion. But there's no commitment. We're not in an exclusive relationship. We might actually be dating other people. This also is a more common arrangement now than we have seen. And the problem here is one person might have a desire to be more than just friends and another person may not. So again, being authentic, being transparent, having those conversations, setting those boundaries, whether it's a same-sex friends with benefit or heterosexual friends with benefits, y'all need to talk to each other, right? Definitely males, historically same-sex or heterosexual, actually report being more comfortable and having a greater desire toward more casual sexual relationships. But that's not to say that women aren't interested in those things. And it's, it'll be interesting to see future research that also is more inclusive, and we look at, how people feel across a variety of gender identities as well. Online dating is definitely more common. In some ways it's safer, right? Because this person really does want to date. Theoretically they're available, but we know that a lot of those profiles, they're lying out their ass and they're married or in a relationship and they're cheating on the side. But it's seemingly safer in terms of protecting ourselves from rejection. But we open ourselves up to scamming, and we open ourselves up to catfishing, and we might actually be opening ourselves up to conditioning ourselves and training ourselves to be making more superficial decisions as well, and to not really be investing in that relationship in the same way that we would before online dating, right? We might have this false sense of security that there's more options out there. We might be waiting for the next best thing to come, that we're not really investing in what could be seemingly a wonderful relationship right in front of us. So although it opens up access, it also could be limiting us and harming us in some ways. And so again, be intentional, be reflective, and make conscious choices, conscious, informed, educated choices. Cohabitation, two people living together and not being married. Don't recommend it because you don't have the same legal protections, particularly in a community property state such as California or Hawaii, right? So things to think about. We do see more people cohabitating and not marrying. A good portion of the people who do live together eventually do get married, but a good chunk of them break off, and then some just maintain cohabitation. Goldie Hawn, I can't think of his name right now. Kurt Russell. Is it Kurt Russell? I don't think it's Kurt Russell. Either way, Goldie Hawn, look it up. They've been together for years, right? And she really, that relationship really was like avant-garde at the time. And now it's much more common. It's like no big deal. Some of you millennials and Gen Zers and may not even know who I'm talking about, but look it up. Now, why do people choose to live together? Well, they may not want to merge themselves financially. They may not be restricted by religious beliefs that they don't subscribe to. And we do see that a smaller percentage of the population is religious over time. Women are no longer dependent and beholden to men. We have our own financial security, our own careers, so it's not necessary. The more educated I become, the more empowered I may feel and become, and so I'm less inclined to get married, right? So all of these reasons can be contributing to people choosing not to marry. Overall, more people around the world are not getting married, and mostly in the developed world, right? And mostly we see that people that are getting married at later ages. And so these trends are not just in the United States. We see them throughout the developed world. We find that there's people with higher incomes, they don't have as many children, they're more likely to postpone childbirth until later ages. And so all of these things mean declining populations as well. And some might believe that'll be good for our environment and good for our world because we've reached levels that may be destructive and not sustainable. Certainly culture matters, right? Are we in a culture where there's very explicit expectations and rules that we have to follow? Are we, promoting marriage from within our own groups and cultures? Or are we promoting opportunity for diversity, right? Are we protecting that group cohesiveness, or are we exploring outside of that, right? And then there's some cultures that have arranged marriages where your partners are selected by different members of society, often parents. And those arranged marriages might be also because of an interest to protect the social, cultural, or religious group, right? So you might want someone that's marrying within your culture. You might want someone that shares those religious views, those family and social values, and that might be a means of passing on their legacy as well as their wealth. So some trends in how we see marriage changing, right? The percentage who've never been married is increasing. The percentage of those that are married is decreasing. The median age at the first marriage is also increasing in women and in men. And here is kind of a downside to relationships is intimate partner violence, right? Sadly, it's more common than we realize. I'm very transparent. I am a domestic violence survivor. How we differentiate between domestic violence and intimate partner violence. Domestic violence is a type of intimate partner violence. Intimate partner violence is broader. It can occur in any intimate relationship, and by intimate, like romantic. Domestic violence is a relationship between members who live together domestically. And so intimate partner violence is when your romantic partner is violent with you. Sadly, that can be physically, that can be sexually. And sadly, stalking is not uncommon. I know that people kind of laugh about cyber stalking. Cyber stalking is wholly problematic. Or like my sister-in-law freaking tracks my sister. And when we come home and she's not home, like she calls because she knows my sister's home. And I'm like, that's some sick shit, and my sister's like, oh, it's no big deal. I'm like, how would you feel if a man were doing that to me, right? Like, no, that's some sick shit. So be careful about jumping into what are seemingly kind of trendy behaviors that might actually show some of the insecure attachments, right? Some of those unhealthy relationship patterns that could become problematic later on. You might be reinforcing and conditioning behaviors that can turn violent and detrimental should the relationship decline or dissolve. So just think about those things. Again, make the choices that are right for you, but be mindful and informed as you consider that. Know that violence and abuse can also be psychological and financial. So it doesn't have to be someone physically harmed you, raped you, or is stalking you. It can mean They're psychologically breaking you down, calling you names, eroding your confidence, eroding your sense of value. They could be threatening to cut you off financially or restrict you or limit you, tell you nobody would want you. You'll never make it without me. Or make you feel fat or inadequate. Or gaslight the shit out of you and make you feel like you're crazy, or you're making shit up, or things didn't happen, or that's not true, or you're being hysterical, or why are you being so reactive, right? And they're putting it on you instead of saying, I'm so sorry, that wasn't my intention to make you feel that way. I want you to feel safe and secure in this relationship. What can I do to help reassure some of your insecurities or doubts or concerns that you have, right? So again, transparency, dialogue, communication, authenticity, all of those things are really important. Violence can not only be physically threatening to us, but that psychological violence can take a toll, and it can manifest in other ways. So it can compromise our health and well-being in other ways. And then, of course, not just our relationships, but parenting, right? Some of us have kids, some of us don't. Some of us want kids, some of us don't. Does that mean we're bad human beings because we don't want kids? No. So don't assume everybody wants to have kids, but also be cautious because some people want kids and can't have kids. Infertility is real, and it's heart-wrenching, and it's a very, very grief-ridden process quite often. Now, we have wonderful medical interventions now, but they are often unaffordable to everybody, and so not everybody has access to those things. So be mindful about the questions that you ask, the pressure that you impose, implied or otherwise, intentional or otherwise, right? But know that more people are postponing and declining parenthood altogether. And the more birth control that's accessible, the lower marital rates, the higher rates of a divorce, higher rates of infertility, all of those things contribute to whether we become parents or don't become parents. As women are becoming more educated and financially empowered, they're choosing not to have children or choosing to postpone children, and that's okay. Know that parenting is a bi-directional thing. So you influence your children and your children influence you, right? When we talk about parenting, it's influenced by our own individual characteristics. So it's influenced by all of those social identities that we've talked about. It's influenced by my beliefs, my personality. It's influenced by how I was parented. We often pass on unhealthy and abusive parenting across generations. That generational trauma stays with us, right? It's influenced by my knowledge, by my education. I make parenting choices based on the knowledge that I have. I know the literature. I'm a developmental psychologist. Becoming a developmental psychologist has made me a better mother. I make more informed choices as a parent. It doesn't mean I'm a perfect mother, because there's no such thing, but it's definitely influenced my parenting. So my knowledge, my health, where I'm at developmentally in my life stage. People say that older parents are more patient. Yeah, shit, that's not been my experience. I have 2 sets of children, and I'm far less patient with the younger set than I was the older set. I just don't have the same patience, particularly now post-cancer, right? My physical health and my resulting mental health impacts my parenting. So all of these things affect who I am, my development, my functioning, and therefore how I parent. Now, the child has their own characteristics. They have their own temperament. They have their own birth order. I have more resources, time, energy, attention when I have my first child compared to when I have my 4th, right? My kids often, my older kids are often like, well, I didn't get those kinds of things when I was their age. I have greater financial security that I can afford my younger children privileges that I couldn't afford my older children, right? Their health might impact their own personality, their own traits and characteristics. We parent children differently, right? I don't respond to my oldest son, who's a really easy, agreeable, nice, easygoing guy. I don't parent him the same. I don't need to be structured and rigid and rule-based. He doesn't need consequences. If I tell him, hey, babe, I'm disappointed in that, he already feels bad enough, right? So I parent him differently based on who he is. Not just based on who I am, but based on who he is. And then there's context, right? My second set of kids, I went through a major divorce and we had some major life transitions and changes. We moved to a different city. I changed jobs. I didn't have access to my friends and family that I had been around for 30 plus years. They changed schools. It was huge. All this upheaval. So that context mattered. It changed our lives, our everyday lives. They went from private school to public school. We moved from, a wealthy neighborhood where houses were far apart. They didn't have kids playing in the street, to a condo where the kids were close, walked to school together. The school was across the street, so they had tight-knit friendships that developed. So all of those contextual factors influence parenting as well. And then that subsequently influences the children and how they develop and grow, which are all beautiful, beautiful things. So it doesn't cover everything in the chapter, so please make sure you're reading the chapter, right? But highlight some of the main things in each of the domains to consider, and the main life experiences and changing dynamic social and psychological development that happens in emerging and early adulthood. So with that, I'm going to leave you with some closing thoughts that might be relevant to this life period. Passion is energy. Feel the power that comes from focusing on what excites you. Whether that's passion for activities, whether that's passion for a relationship, whether that's passion for a career, it can be energizing. So take the time to explore the things that excite you and the power that comes with it. And then finally, so it turns out that being an adult is mostly Googling how to do stuff. And that's just a little funny, a little humor, because guess what? Even as adults, we don't have this shit all figured out. We still are left with questions. And there's no right or wrong answer. So explore your resources, figure out what's best for you, and do you, boo. Take care. Aloha.